Brady Bunch, Florence Henderson was best known as a Broadway singer and actor. Most of us discovered her, though, in 1969 when the Brady Bunch started its run on TV.
Behind the iconic theme song and cheerful family dinners, the Brady Bunch harbored secrets that would shock America. While cameras rolled on television's most wholesome family, forbidden romances bloomed between unlikely cast members. Teenage crushes crossed dangerous lines.
As Mom Carol Brady from the Brady Bunch died suddenly yesterday.
Equipment fell from ceilings, nearly killing child actors. And the perfect TV father was living a double life that tormented him every single day. For decades, these truths stayed buried beneath the squeaky clean image. For 50 years, these secrets stayed buried beneath the squeaky clean image that made the show famous. Now, the survivors are finally saying what no one was supposed to talk about. The truth will shatter everything you believed about America's favorite family. Inappropriate romantic relationships. The Brady Bunch production team organized a special filming trip to Hawaii during the show's 4th season. The tropical location offered fresh scenery and exciting storylines for the wholesome family sitcom. What producers didn't anticipate was how the exotic setting, combined with teenage hormones and time away from parental supervision, would create situations they never intended to happen. Barry Williams and Maureen McCormick were playing siblings Greg and Marcia Brady on screen, but the Hawaii trip changed their relationship forever. Away from the controlled environment of the studio, surrounded by beaches and swaying palm trees, the two teenagers started seeing each other differently. The lines between their fictional sibling relationship and their real identities as attractive young actors began to blur in ways that made everyone uncomfortable. They started a brief romance that they kept hidden from the adult cast and crew. Between takes, they would slip away to walk along the beach together, holding hands where cameras couldn't capture them. During downtime at the hotel, they found excuses to spend time alone in ways that had nothing to do with rehearsing lines. The other Brady kids noticed immediately, watching with a mixture of curiosity and amusement as two of their TV siblings became an actual couple behind closed doors. The pattern of Brady kids dating each other didn't stop with Williams and McCormick. Mike Lookinland and Susan Olsen, who played the youngest Brady children, Bobby and Cindy, kissed in the doghouse on set during one of their filming breaks. They were children when it happened, young enough that the kiss was more about curiosity than actual romance, but they had still turned their TV sibling relationship into something else entirely. Christopher Knight also had romantic involvements with cast members at various points during the show's run. The Brady kids were spending more time together than with their actual families, going through puberty in close proximity while playing brothers and sisters on national television. They were attractive young people working together for years, and romance among them became inevitable despite how inappropriate it seemed. Producers either didn't know what was happening or chose to ignore the relationships developing among their child actors. The cast kept these relationships secret for decades, only revealing the truth when they were adults, and the show had been off the air long enough that the revelations felt more nostalgic than scandalous. But while some Brady kids were finding romance with each other, two of the TV sisters were developing a hatred that would poison the cast for 50 years. The Maureen McCormick and Eve Plum feud.
No, I don't think that. I think that's all myth and rumor, so I don't know what you're talking about.
Maureen McCormick and Eve Plum played sisters Marcia and Jan Brady on screen, delivering performances that convinced America they were a loving family. Off-screen, they couldn't stand each other. The hatred wasn't based on a single dramatic incident. It was accumulated resentment built over years of working together in close proximity. McCormick was the pretty, popular one, both on screen and off, receiving more attention from fans and producers alike. Plum was the middle sister, always living in Marcia's shadow on the show and apparently feeling the same way in real life. The dynamic they played on television became their actual reality behind the cameras. They maintained professionalism during filming because their careers depended on it. They delivered their lines convincingly, acted like sisters who loved each other, and created believable family moments for the audience at home. But the moment cameras stopped rolling, they avoided each other completely. They didn't socialize between takes, didn't talk unless work required it, and made their mutual dislike obvious to everyone around them. Susan Olsen, who played their younger sister Cindy, found herself constantly caught in the middle of their toxic relationship. The feud intensified after the Brady Bunch ended. McCormick wrote a memoir years later where she claimed she had kissed Plum during their time on the show, describing it as a brief experimental moment between two young women. Plum denied the story completely, telling reporters she found McCormick's claim tiresome and attention-seeking. The public dispute over whether the kiss happened added new layers to their already poisonous relationship. A Brady Bunch reunion was planned for 2010, with all surviving cast members supposed to participate in celebrating the show's legacy. Plum refused to be in the same room as McCormick. Organizers tried desperately to negotiate, even offering to keep the two women physically separated. During the entire event, Plum still refused, and the reunion was canceled. But while McCormick and Plum were building their legendary feud, another cast member was fighting battles with the show itself that revealed how much he despised everything the Brady Bunch represented. Robert Reed's struggles with the Brady Bunch. Robert Reed played Mike Brady, the patriarch of America's favorite blended family. But off-camera, he hated almost everything about the Brady Bunch. He thought the scripts were terrible, the storylines unrealistic, and the entire show beneath his abilities as a serious actor. The cognitive dissonance between what he was doing and what he wanted to be doing tormented him every single day of production. Reed had trained in Shakespeare and performed in prestigious theater productions before landing the role that would define his career. He viewed himself as a dramatic actor who had somehow ended up trapped on a lightweight sitcom about a family with 6 kids and a maid. The disconnect between his theatrical aspirations and his television reality created a bitterness that poisoned his relationship with everyone involved in the production. He argued with producers constantly, turning every script into a battleground. Reed documented plot holes, character inconsistencies, and dialogue that no real person would ever speak. He filled notebooks with complaints about everything he thought was stupid or unrealistic about each episode. The producers found Reed exhausting and irrelevant to their goals. They were making family entertainment for children and parents looking for harmless escapism, not prestige television that would win critical acclaim. Reed refused to film certain scenes he considered too ridiculous, arguing until producers either changed the material or found ways to shoot around him. The conflicts created delays and tension that affected the entire cast and crew. Everyone was stuck between Reed and the producers, watching the fights play out while trying to stay out of the crossfire. Florence Henderson occasionally tried to mediate. But Reed's disdain for the show was too deep for anyone to manage effectively. He stayed with the Brady Bunch for its entire run, despite wanting to leave, kept there by the steady paycheck and the fame that came with playing America's ideal dad. He even appeared in reunion movies and specials years later, still complaining about the quality of the writing while cashing the checks. But Reed's struggles with the show's scripts were nothing compared to the secret he was hiding about his personal life, a truth that made playing Mike Brady a psychological torture nobody on set could understand. Robert Reed's hidden identity. Robert Reed was a man lover. He had known it for years, but the Brady Bunch filmed during an era when being openly a man lover in Hollywood meant career death. Reed stayed closeted throughout the show's entire run, and for years afterward, living a double life that created enormous psychological pressure with every passing day. Playing Mike Brady, the ultimate television father and husband, while hiding his true identity, became a form of torture. Reed had to portray romance with Florence Henderson in scenes that millions of Americans watched each week. He had to model traditional masculinity for young viewers who saw Mike Brady as the perfect example of American fatherhood. All while knowing his real life contradicted everything the character represented to the public. Reed kept his personal life completely separate from his professional world with obsessive vigilance. The cast didn't know the truth about him. The crew didn't know. The producers suspected but never asked because they didn't want confirmation. As long as Reed kept his identity private, they could pretend not to notice the signs and continue selling Mike Brady as the wholesome family man America wanted to see. The secrecy required constant energy and attention that consumed Reed from the inside. He couldn't date openly or bring partners to industry events. He couldn't risk anyone seeing him in situations that might reveal what he was hiding. The isolation was crushing, but absolutely necessary for his career survival in an industry that destroyed actors for being different. Reed had a brief romantic involvement with Florence Henderson at some point during the show's run. Whether it was a desperate attempt to convince himself he could be straight or just a moment of connection between two lonely people was never entirely clear. Henderson later described it as a one-time occurrence that didn't change their working relationship. But the involvement added another layer of complexity to Reed's already complicated situation. Reed's dissatisfaction with the Brady Bunch scripts took on new meaning when viewed through this lens. He was fighting with producers, partly because he resented being trapped in a show that celebrated traditional family values he couldn't personally embody. Every episode about Mike and Carol's happy marriage reminded Reed of the life he couldn't have publicly. Meanwhile, the child actors on set were facing their own dangers that producers worked desperately to keep hidden from the public. On-set dangers and child safety. Susan Olsen's first day filming The Brady Bunch started with equipment falling from a catwalk high above the set. The heavy piece struck the 7-year-old actress directly in the face, knocking her to the ground as blood came immediately and her face began swelling from the impact. Crew members rushed to help, while producers assessed the situation and decided how to handle an accident that could have killed their youngest cast member. Doctors examined Olsen and determined she didn't have any serious injuries beyond bruising and painful swelling. No broken bones, no concussion symptoms, just visible damage to her face that would be obvious on camera for days or weeks. The production faced a decision about whether to shut down filming to let Olsen recover properly or continue working despite her injuries. They chose to continue. Olsen came back to set the next day with visible bruises covering her face. The makeup department did what they could to cover the damage, while cinematographers adjusted lighting to minimize how obvious the injuries looked on film. Filming continued like nothing had happened. Nobody from the production issued statements about the accident or explained why Cindy Brady had bruises in certain episodes. The incident was kept as quiet as possible to avoid questions about safety protocols on a set where children worked long hours. Christopher Knight faced a different kind of trauma when producers placed a live tarantula on his body for a scene. The script called for Peter Brady to be scared of the spider, which matched perfectly with how the 11-year-old Knight actually felt about having a large spider crawling across his skin. The crew assured him the tarantula was harmless and couldn't hurt him. But none of these assurances made Knight feel better about the situation he was being forced into for entertainment. He could feel the spider's legs moving across his skin and see its body and eyes, while every instinct screamed at him to brush it off or run away. Knight maintained composure through the take, delivering his lines while genuinely terrified the spider might bite him or do something unpredictable. The professionalism required from a child actor in that moment was extraordinary, but Knight revealed years later that he hadn't felt brave at all during the filming. While child actors were being pushed beyond their limits and endangered for the sake of good television, one cast member was working tirelessly to protect them and keep the production functioning despite all the chaos. Florence Henderson's positive influence. Florence Henderson played Carol Brady, the perfect television mother who radiated warmth and wisdom in every scene. Off-camera, Henderson worked just as hard to maintain that same harmony. Among the cast and crew during the long and often difficult production days, she viewed herself as responsible for keeping everyone's spirits up when tensions rose and problems threatened to derail filming. Henderson had a natural sense of humor that could lighten even the most tense situations on set. When arguments broke out between Robert Reed and the producers, or when stress levels climbed during challenging shoots, Henderson would crack jokes or find creative ways to make people laugh. The entire mood on set often depended on Henderson's energy and her ability to redirect negative emotions into something more productive. She paid special attention to the child actors who were dealing with pressures that most children never experienced in their lives. Henderson understood they needed someone to talk to who wasn't their actual parents, someone who existed inside their strange world of television production but could still offer guidance and support. She made herself available whenever the Brady kids needed to confide in someone who genuinely cared about their well-being beyond their performance value. Henderson also worked as a mediator between Robert Reed and the producers during their frequent conflicts. She couldn't fix Reed's fundamental unhappiness with the show or change his deep-seated resentment of the material, but she could smooth over individual incidents before they exploded into major problems that shut down production. Her diplomatic skills kept filming functioning even during Reed's worst periods of open hostility. The cast loved Henderson for her warmth and accessibility, despite being the show's leading lady. Henderson's ability to foster genuine familial connections among the cast made the Brady Bunch set feel different from other productions, and the warmth viewers saw on screen reflected real affection that Henderson had cultivated over years of working together. But Henderson's considerable efforts couldn't fix everything wrong with the Brady Bunch. Some problems were too deep or too personal for humor and maternal energy to solve, and one cast member in particular was growing increasingly uncomfortable with everything the show represented to American audiences. Eve Plum's rejection of the Brady Bunch. Eve Plum hated being associated with the Brady Bunch more than anyone could imagine. She found the show's squeaky clean image oppressive and completely false, a sanitized version of family life that bore no resemblance to reality. As she got older, her discomfort with being Jan Brady intensified until she couldn't tolerate the association anymore. Plum desperately wanted to be taken seriously as an actress with range and depth. She actively pursued roles in darker, more complex projects that had nothing to do with family sitcoms or wholesome entertainment. She tried to distance herself from the Brady Bunch in every interview and public appearance, making it clear that Jan Brady was not who she was as a person or as an artist. The problem was that audiences couldn't separate Eve Plum from Jan Brady, no matter how hard she tried. Casting directors saw Jan when they looked at her audition tapes. Fans approached her on the street, expecting the character rather than the actual person behind the role. The part she'd played as a child had become a prison she couldn't escape, following her everywhere she went and defining her in ways she desperately resented. Plum refused to participate in some Brady Bunch reunion projects over the years. She didn't want to keep reinforcing the association that was destroying her ability to be seen as anything else. She needed people to see her as a serious actress, capable of complex, dramatic work, not just as the middle Brady daughter who complained about living in Marcia's shadow. The refusals created significant tension with other cast members who wanted to capitalize on the show's powerful nostalgia value. When Plum did participate in reunions, her discomfort was painfully visible to everyone watching. She gave interviews where she made absolutely clear that the Brady Bunch wasn't representative of her personal beliefs or the kind of work she valued. She wanted everyone to understand that Jan Brady was simply a character she had played decades earlier, not a reflection of her actual identity or artistic ambitions. The more Plum pushed against the Brady Bunch legacy, the more people associated her with it. Her very resistance became part of her public story, and articles about Plum always mentioned how much she hated being known for the show that had made her famous as a child. While Plum was fighting desperately to escape John Brady's shadow, the rest of the cast was discovering that their association with the show had destroyed their chances of ever being anything else in Hollywood. The typecasting problem for all cast members. The Brady Bunch made the cast members famous across America and gave them financial security as children. It also made them virtually unemployable in the eyes of casting directors who couldn't see past the characters they had played for 5 years. Being known as one of the Brady kids meant being seen as that character forever, unable to play anything else convincingly, no matter how talented they actually were. Barry Williams tried desperately to land serious film roles after the show ended. He auditioned for dramatic parts that could showcase his range as an actor, but casting directors couldn't see past Greg Brady standing in front of them. They would watch his auditions and only see the oldest Brady son trying unconvincingly to play someone else. Williams lost role after role to actors without his sitcom baggage weighing them down. Christopher Knight faced identical problems in his attempts to build a post-Brady career. Peter Brady was tattooed across his forehead, as far as Hollywood was concerned, and Knight couldn't escape the association no matter what he did. No matter how different the roles he auditioned for were from his Brady Bunch character, casting directors saw only the middle Brady boy playing dress-up. Maureen McCormick had it worst of all. She was America's sweetheart, the pretty teenage girl that everyone loved as Marcia Brady. That wholesome image made her completely untouchable for edgier or more complex roles that could have demonstrated her abilities. Directors wanted the wholesome image or nothing at all, leaving McCormick trapped in a narrow box of acceptable roles. The Brady kids watched other young actors from different shows land diverse roles and build successful careers while they struggled just to get auditions. Their enormous success on the Brady Bunch had become the very thing preventing them from having any other professional success as adult actors. Some cast members eventually accepted their fate and leaned into the Brady Association, doing reunion shows and nostalgia appearances for money. But the acceptance came with deep bitterness about what might have been if they had never been Brady kids at all. Mike Lookinland essentially gave up on acting entirely. He couldn't get roles that interested him and refused to spend his life being Bobby Brady at fan conventions and nostalgia events. He walked away from the entertainment industry to build a completely different life, far from Hollywood. For some cast members, the inability to move forward professionally created problems far worse than damaged careers, leading them down paths of self-destruction that nearly killed them. Maureen McCormick's hard substances. Addiction. Maureen McCormick started using hard substances after the Brady Bunch ended and her acting career stalled completely. The transition from child star to unemployed adult was brutal and disorienting, and the substances helped numb the disappointment and loss of identity that came with being Marcia Brady, with nowhere left to go in Hollywood. The hard substances use escalated quickly from casual experimentation to full addiction. McCormick went from occasional user to complete addict within months, reaching a point where she needed the substances just to function through basic daily activities. Everything in her life started revolving around getting high and staying high, with all other priorities falling away as the addiction consumed her. McCormick traded sex for hard substances when she ran out of money to buy it. The wholesome image from the Brady Bunch made the degradation even worse in her own mind. America's perfect teenage daughter was sleeping with substances dealers to feed an addiction that was destroying her from the inside. She developed bulimia alongside her hard substances addiction, and her relationship with her body and self-worth collapsed completely. She was destroying herself in every possible way, simultaneously. A crucial audition for Raiders of the Lost Ark came up in 1980. The role could have resurrected McCormick's dying career and given her the serious dramatic work she had been desperately chasing for years. She missed the audition entirely because she was too high to function, or even remember she had somewhere important to be. Missing that audition became a devastating turning point. McCormick realized she had just destroyed possibly her last chance at having a real career beyond Marcia Brady. The hard substances had taken absolutely everything from her, including the one opportunity that might have saved her professionally and personally. McCormick's parents intervened and forced her into treatment over her furious objections. She was angry at them for interfering in her life, but she was too far gone to save herself without help from people who loved her. The recovery process was long and incredibly painful, as McCormick had to rebuild her life from nothing while dealing with overwhelming shame about what she had become. McCormick achieved sobriety and maintained it for over 40 years, eventually talking publicly about her addiction to help others struggling with similar demons. But the years lost to hard substances and the career opportunities destroyed by her addiction never came back. While McCormick was destroying herself with hard substances, another Brady kid was developing a different addiction that would nearly cost him his life. Mike Lookinland's alcoholism. Mike Lookinland spent his entire childhood working on the Brady Bunch instead of living like a normal kid. He never experienced playing in the neighborhood with friends, attending regular school with other children his age, or enjoying summers off from responsibilities. There was only work, constantly playing Bobby Brady while missing out on everything that made childhood meaningful. When the show ended, Lookinland tried desperately to reclaim the childhood he had lost. He was in his 20s by then, far too old for actual childhood experiences, but emotionally, he was stuck at the age when he had first started working. The confusion about who he was beyond Bobby Brady and what he had been robbed of manifested as increasingly reckless behavior that spiraled out of control. Lookinland started drinking heavily to cope with the feeling that something essential had been stolen from him. The alcohol helped push away the emptiness and the confusion about his identity beyond the character millions of Americans associated with his face. Every drink temporarily filled the void where his childhood should have been. The drinking progressed rapidly from heavy to alcoholism. Lookinland couldn't stop once he started drinking, continuing until he passed out or until someone physically intervened. His life narrowed until it revolved entirely around alcohol, the same way it had once revolved around the Brady Bunch production schedule that had consumed his youth. In 1997, Lookinland got arrested for driving under the influence. The incident was public and deeply embarrassing. For everyone involved, Bobby Brady, the youngest and most innocent Brady boy, had become a middle-aged alcoholic getting arrested for drunk driving and making headlines for all the wrong reasons. The arrest forced Lookinland to finally confront his addiction honestly. He couldn't pretend anymore that his drinking was under control or just a temporary problem he could handle alone. The legal consequences and the public humiliation pushed him toward getting the professional help he desperately needed to survive. Lookinland entered rehabilitation and began the difficult process of getting sober. Recovery meant facing everything he had been drinking to avoid for years, including the lost childhood, the stunted emotional development, and the deep anger at being a child actor who never actually got to be a child. Lookinland credited the arrest with ultimately saving his life. But even as he was getting sober and rebuilding, the show's legacy was creating problems for another cast member in ways nobody had anticipated or could prevent. Robert Reed's death and HIV secret. Robert Reed died in 1992 from colon cancer, at least according to what the death certificate officially stated. The reality was far more complicated than the public was allowed to know. Reed had been diagnosed HIV positive years earlier, and the virus had weakened his immune system significantly, likely contributing to the cancer that ultimately killed him. Reed kept his HIV status secret, the same way he had kept his sexuality hidden throughout his entire career. He didn't want to be defined by AIDS during an era when the disease carried enormous social stigma and was seen as a death sentence. He wanted to be remembered as a serious actor, not as another tragic statistic of the AIDS crisis that was devastating the A-man lover community. The secrecy extended even to his final days in the hospital. Reed was dying, but only a handful of people close to him knew the truth about his HIV diagnosis. The public narrative remained carefully focused on colon cancer, the socially acceptable terminal illness that didn't raise uncomfortable questions about how he had contracted it or what his sexuality might have been. The truth about Reed's HIV status eventually came out, but not immediately after his death. For a period, the official story of death by colon cancer stood completely unchallenged in the media. Reed got the privacy he had desperately wanted, at least temporarily, before the full truth emerged. When the HIV diagnosis finally became public knowledge, it recontextualized Reed's entire life and career in profound ways. The unhappiness on the Brady Bunch, the constant conflicts with producers, the secrecy and isolation suddenly all made painful sense through the lens of a man-lover man hiding a terminal diagnosis while playing America's ideal father. Reed never got to live openly or be himself without fear, dying still trapped by the role that had made him both famous and profoundly miserable. The Brady Bunch sold America a fantasy of perfect family life that never existed behind the cameras. Child actors were endangered, typecast, and robbed of normal childhoods. Forbidden romances crossed every professional boundary. Cast members developed addictions that nearly killed them. Robert Reed lived and died trapped by a role that contradicted everything he was. The secrets producers buried for decades revealed the true cost of creating wholesome entertainment. Fame and success as children destroyed their futures as adults, leaving scars that never fully healed. The truth was always too dark for primetime television. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.